I've always been obviously interested in the border, the idea of the border, and whether it's a third culture. It's always the border towns and border itself. It's just a third thing from whatever it's bordering. And so to be offered this chance to do something, I first thought of the Rio Grande, which is the border I was most familiar with, and the idea of each culture on each side being a mirror, kind of a distorted mirror of the other. So I did some drawings of the idea of using mirrors on banks of the river, with mirrors facing each other. But then the piece with Insight piece, which was, they had invited, I think, 50 Mexican artists to show in the U.S., 50 U.S. artists to show in Mexico, or show in, say, in the U.S. in San Diego or and in Tijuana. And a portion of those artists could do pieces on the border. And I went to, we drove down to a little, just below Tijuana to have lunch one day. I went down with Mary Beebe and Linda Forche, who was kind of head of the project. And I had no idea what I was going to do. I just thought that I'd do something on the border. And I saw the wall that they were building, and I had no idea that the U.S. was building a wall. And
what year was this?
Huh?
And what year was this?
This was 93. And what they were doing, building it out of, was these metal sheets that are used for tarmac in the desert during the Iraq War. So it was surplus from the Iraq War that they had, and they were just standing them on end and building this wall with them. I think they'd got about 30 miles inland at that time, and it came right out of the ocean. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was out there working away at it. And I was stunned because, you know, there was still the echoes of the Berlin Wall and all of them, just walls themselves. And so, you know, I somehow wanted to figure out how to address that. And I got the idea of doing 2 platforms initially, and I did drawings of these platforms on each side of the border with a microphone and a speaker where that people spoke, had an exchange across the border. And they got very paranoid about this, you know, when I presented it. And said, well, you know, these things cannot stay there. You know, they cannot be there and be used all the time because it, you know, something's going to happen. And the political climate in California was pretty funky then anyway, because it was Proposition 187 was full tilt, and Proposition 187, I think, was dealing with illegals getting medical care and education, you know, whether they had the right to do that. So there was a lot of tension. And so I just decided to put these platforms on wheels. And I got 2 vans, and one for each side of the border, and put a platform on the top and with a ladder that went up, and a sound system, and a translator on each side, and a sign that invited people to get up on and say anything they would like to the other side. And there was one little spot where there was an opening in the wall, and it was where there was a pylon that had been, in the 1950s, I think, it had been installed there, dedicated to the friendship between Mexico and the United States. And it was in a circular concrete area. And the wall stopped on each of those concrete areas and then became a chain link fence right up to but you could see, it's the only place you could see the other side. So those were the spots that we parked the vans, and they were about maybe 20 feet apart. And it invited anybody to get up on it and say anything they wished to the other side. People played music, people read poems, people gave incredibly eloquent speeches. and had incredible conversations from each side, and there was a great dignity to it, which I think part of it had to do with people getting up on that and looking eye to eye, with one another and actually talking to one another. It was the first piece that I think I ever did that I really was, really inspired by the idea of setting up a situation for people to respond or interact with one another in some way or another. I mean, you could actually set that up and write a piece for it, write this, But the things that just happened by chance were the best. It's like one day there was a whole mariachi band that was playing on one side and a jazz band on the other, and they were jamming across the border, And the only issues that ever came up, one of the things that Border Patrol were concerned about is that somebody getting up and saying the wrong thing, somebody shooting them from the other side, that was a big concern. But I remember there were cops on the Mexican side that got up and read poems and sang, and there was one guy that rode his horse up on the American side. He tied his horse to the van and got up and talked about how he had hurt his back and had been in the hospital, and he was still paying the bills for his injury. And he said he was laying next to an immigrant or an illegal alien who had the exact same injury that the state of California was paying for. And so you got those other angles from things, and you started to see when people started talking like that, the complexity of some of the issues that were going on.